Okay, so we're going to play around with this wiggle effect just a little bit more, but it's going to teach you some ways of customizing your expressions that are very different than I think most programs that we use. So let's say we want to turn the wiggle effect on or off. In this little video that I worked on, this you'll see this wiggle as this rocket takes off. The wiggle grows in intensity, so the whole scene like starts to wiggle. There's Caleb. Let's see that again. And there's even some wiggle on this frame as well. So you don't just have to wiggle objects, you can even wiggle your video. So I'm going to delete this expression and let's just throw in, you know, what we had before. Wiggle, let's do 20 times 200. And this is basically, this effect, you know, it's just on. There's no way to like really turn it off. So I'm going to show you a weird way. I'm going to hit EE to bring it back up. A weird way to turn that on and off. So in effects and presets, there's something called a slider. And if I bring that slider control, it's an effect. If I bring it on here, basically we just get nothing. It doesn't do anything, but it's a series of numbers that you can turn up or down. So instead of saying wiggle 20 times per second by 200, let me delete that. And with my little type tool there, I'm just going to use this pick whip and drag it to this slider. So now it says wiggle 20 times, and then it's going to say take the value of whatever that effect is called slider control slider. So it's an effect called slider control, and its particular parameter is called slider. Luckily, you don't have to remember all that. I just picked whip to that. So now it shouldn't wiggle at all because the slider is at 0. But if I increase that, so you could keyframe this value then. So let's say it starts at 0, and let me stretch out this keyframe a bit. So it starts at 0. I'm going to keyframe that, and then by here it's at like 100. And let me move that keyframe. So I hit U to bring up the keyframe. I'm going to move this original 0 keyframe to start a little later. So it's nothing, and then it starts to shake, and then maybe I'll turn it back down to 0. So that's pretty neat. I don't think there's a way to rename it, which would be nice to like, oh yeah, cool, let's call this amp. So like the amplitude. Let's grab another slider control and call this one frequency. I'm going to hit EE to bring up my expression. So now, it even updated the name. Now it's calling it amp. So let's delete this 20 for how many times per second. And let's make sure our little type tool's there and pick whip and do the next slider. So you could put the slider above it if you wanted it to be accurate. So now there's no more wiggle anymore because it's wiggling 0 times a second. If I say 1, it'll wiggle 1 time. If I increase that to 200, it'll wiggle a lot. That's pretty crazy. So why would you want to change the frequency or animate it? Maybe as a rocket takes off, the frequency of shake gets less. So maybe at its strongest point, this would be like wiggling 50 times per second. And let's set a keyframe, and then here, maybe at the very beginning it's wiggling 200 as it takes off, 0. And keyframes are being created. I know that if I just hit U, there's my 0. It's starting to jitter, go crazy. So maybe this one's too much. But as you can see, and we'll set that to 0. Maybe not 0, but maybe like 2. So then it slows down. Set it to 10. Okay. So we're getting all this like diversity in our animation. Basically, the takeaway from this is we had this wiggle expression, but then instead of putting numbers in it, we took different parameters by using this pick whip tool. So you could also, let's see, in theory, you could have a shape position, and let's hit EE. So instead of, so it's at position 540. Let's move it, let's move it down. So you could even delete that and say the frequency, I want it to be parented to the X position. So now it's saying where it's going. So let's see. And then if we were to move this up, the value is increasing, so it's making our shake even more erratic. Yeah. Okay.